Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to talk about some sewing techniques that and tips on using a vintage sewing machine, but particularly with a hand crank, because with a hand crank you're only using your left hand to guide the sewing because your right hand's busy cranking. So the first thing I'm going to go through is turning a corner. And obviously it doesn't matter with turning a corner, you could do this on an electric machine. But what you might find when you're turning corners is the stitch skips and the corners aren't actually really that precise. Now, when you follow patterns or possibly when you've read the manual, it talks about, I'm just going to get this set up. It talks about pivoting with the needle to make your turn. So what they are saying, or what people interpret, is that your needle goes in, you then lift the presser foot, make the turn so that your needle, when it's in the down position, the fabric is pivoting on this needle. You then drop the presser foot and then you carry on. Drop the needle in, lift the presser foot, turn, drop the presser foot and carry on. Problem is, when your needle is in that down position, it's in the middle of forming a stitch. So it doesn't know that you've turned the corner, so that when it comes back up forming that stitch, that's when it skips, because you've now put it at a different angle. So the stitch that's being formed when the needle is down starts to cut across. The way to get round that and to have much even, neater stitches is, so I'm going to do a row of stitches. When I get to my corner, I just put the tip of the needle in, just enough to pivot the fabric. I haven't put the whole needle in, which means it hasn't begun with forming a stitch. So just the tip of the needle is in. I then do the turn, put the presser foot down. The machine does not know I've turned the corner, so it continues making that stitch. So you put the tip in only, pivot your fabric, carry on making the stitch. Tip goes in, drop the presser foot, it makes the stitch. And if I just leave it about there, I think, and then I will hold this up to the camera and then show you the difference. So these were just with the needle in its furthest down point. When you come to here, that is a much crisper corner because the stitch hadn't formed as you put the tip of the needle in. So when you pivoted around, it forms the stitch in the corner and then continues, and it goes down to the next point. You just put the tip of the needle in, turn the fabric, it makes the stitch in that corner because it forms on that pivot as opposed to on here. So yes, do use the needle to pivot your fabric, but do not put the needle all the way in. Do not allow it to form a stitch. Just put the smallest tip of the needle in. So that's the first tip. The next one is when you're stitching at the very beginning and at the very end. So it says to backstitch, and what that does is that locks the stitch at the beginning of your sewing so that it locks and it doesn't start to unravel. Now that's fine if you have a machine with a reverse stitch, for example. there's my reverse stitch on my hand crank. So for me, I can just stitch, reverse, stitch again, carry on. If you don't have a reverse stitch, there are a couple of ways that you can start. First of all, and if I just go there, first of all, you can do a couple of stitches, lift your presser foot, spin the fabric the other way, drop your presser foot down and stitch back what you've already done. Lift, pivot, drop, and then continue your stitching. So let me just lift that up and show you what that looks like. So you can see I stitched 3 stitches forward, pivoted, 3 stitches back, pivoted, and then 3 stitches again. So that's locked that stitch in, but that can be a bit, it slows down the start and end of your sewing. Another way is, and I usually do 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. Lift the needle up to its highest point, lift the presser foot just enough and pull your fabric towards you, and then drop the presser foot, and then 1, 2, 3, and now you're carrying on. So I will show that again. Lift the needle to the highest position, lift your presser foot, I mean you can lift it all the way, and then just pull your fabric towards you, just a stitch or 2. Drop the needle back down, and then carry on stitching. I find that an easier way, and it's quicker. So that is stitching 3 stitches, lift the needle up and the presser bar up, pull the fabric towards you, the needle drops back down, and then you carry on. And you can see where I did that just with 2 stitches on that one. Both techniques will work. I find this one quicker. You can also do that even when you're treadling as well, because the more you practice that, and I'll just move that across, the more you practice it, and I'm going to show you kind of my full speed, well not full speed, but my hand cranking speed, the way I would normally do it. So I would go 1, 2, 3, up, pull, back, carry on. And that is much quicker and still does the same job in terms of locking, as opposed to going stop, lift, spin, drop, back, a couple, lift, spin, back, drop a couple. If you had a machine with a motor and you don't have a reverse stitch, what you can actually do, and obviously I can't show it because I don't have a motor, but as it's stitching, you can then, obviously because you've got 2 hands, as you're stitching, you can just lift and pull, and it will do the same thing, but you can do it at such a speed that you're not lifting the presser foot up completely, you're only lifting it enough just to pull, and that will do the same thing as well. So that's with back stitching without having a reverse function on your machine. The next thing I want to show you, and I'm just going to get rid of that. Let's get the fabric set up. And I'm just going to wheel back a bit. So left-handed sewing. Now if you look at a sewing machine, and let's pull this up a little bit, and I'm going to go backwards a bit. There. All sewing machines are left-handed. All of the action is going on the left-hand side of the machine. The right hand does the hand crank. Okay, with more modern machines, they're electric, so you can use both hands. If you are left-handed, then you have more control with your left hand anyway. For those that are right-handed, yes, that can be quite difficult because you're using your non-strong hand. It didn't make a difference when they had motors and obviously with treadles because you're using two hands anyway. So the trick is to try and master one-handed sewing. And yes, that is difficult. So I'm going to just, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up, because one of the hardest things to learn with sewing is a straight stitch. I know that seems easy, like just doing a straight line. It helps if you practice. First of all, cut some really straight fabric and then just pay attention. Let me try and get up a bit closer and move the camera. So what I'm doing when I first learned to sew is I was paying attention to the foot on this side and the edge of the fabric. And my left hand is just gently guiding almost. Now, let me see if I can, hopefully that's a good angle for you. So let's get a couple of stitches going. And predominantly I'm using this finger just to, I mean the other fingers, it's not to force the fabric or to push the fabric, it's just, more than anything, it's just gently nudging the fabric to get a straight line going. Now if I was, because I'm stitching right on the edge, what I find is I put this finger here, because that is my edge line. So if I start stitching, I put more force down on this finger to stop the fabric coming this way. So I'm using my finger as a block, but like a gentle block, but it stops. If I pull that fabric, my finger is stopping that from moving. So I've got into a habit of using this as a guide. And as long as my finger is not allowing the fabric to move this way, I don't need my right hand. So if you watch my finger, it is gently nudging the fabric to ensure that it is staying on track. So it would be worth, if you're not very confident with sewing straight lines, practice that. Even if you've got a machine with a motor, sit on your right hand. Don't touch your right hand. So you can see I've made that straight line, but it's also based on the edge as well, which I didn't actually cut that straight. But I know my line is straight. So let's do the same thing again. My finger stops the fabric moving this way. And where necessary, I will just nudge my finger just across, just to keep that fabric in position. And it's all with the left hand, because the right hand's just doing the clanking. And now you're starting to get straight lines. So it takes practice, but I recommend just practice. Do literally what I used to do to practice straight lines. Start with a very straight edge and then just start working your way across, but use your finger as a stop. So, although sewing in straight lines is nice and easy, how do you then start sewing a curve when the machine just wants to go relatively straight? Right, I'm set up. Now, if I don't touch, I'm not going to touch the fabric at all. I'm just going to let it move. And even with everything being set up correctly, you can see that is starting to move. I'm not guiding it, it's just naturally starting to bend away a little bit. And if we look here, you can see that, you can see that starting to go off track. What happens when the needle's in the down position, your feed dogs are also moving, so they're moving below the plate and above the plate. When the needle's in the down position, the feed dogs have dropped, which means there's a little bit more movement than there would be when the feed dogs are up. So with your magic first finger, you can use that to your advantage and start to move the fabric. It's easier to, there's no point moving the fabric like that because you can see that's starting to bunch up because of the pressure. But you can start moving it when the machine is sewing. So all I'm going to do, hopefully I'm at the right angle. I'm just going to use my finger and I'm just going to start to guide the fabric in different places. So I'm just using my left hand. And I'm actually using two hands because I'm walking. Let's try and get, so as I'm sewing, when that needle comes up, I'm twisting. Needle goes down, when the needle goes up, I can twist just that little bit. But what I'm doing is I'm actually doing it at speed, but if I just gently, I'm not putting pressure on the fabric, because if I put pressure on the fabric, I'm either going to pull it towards me or I'm going to push it that way and it's just going to buckle. And I'm not dragging it because you can see what happens. It just catches. So it's a very gentle movement. And I'm just tugging along. So now I'm going to just pick up some speed now, because you can do it that way as well. So to get you confident in sewing in rounds, literally just take your stitch, grab a piece of fabric and just take your stitch for a walk. Just go for a wander on the fabric. So I'm just guiding, I'm not tugging, I'm not pulling. So and the fabric is only going to move when the feed dogs are down and there's slightly less pressure. So you're using that to your advantage. So I'm going to do a complete spin. And let's leave it about there. So let's take that up. And I took my stitch for a walk. We went for a wander. So it's good practice. It's good to start helping, just getting used to just gently sliding that fabric around. I'm not pushing and I'm not pulling. I'm just allowing it to just go with the flow. So you start getting some nice rounded stitches. Sewing in the round is kind of a combination of following your edge line and allowing it to bend with the fabric. So I did cut a piece of fabric. I'm not going to do a full circle because that's boring. But what I do have, if I hold that down, you can see I've got a large round circle. So let's start on the edge here. Let me just make sure my needle is, oh, my needle just slipped down. I'm gonna have to go up now. Right, let's start on the edge here. Needle in first, then press. So I'm gonna follow the edge of the fabric so that I've got a nice neat stitch, but I'm gonna gently just go with the flow of the fabric and feed the fabric gently round. There's absolutely no point in trying to sew a round piece of fabric straight, because you're gonna be constantly kind of forcing this to be straight to do it, and you can't. You've got to allow the fabric to roll round and under. So let me get a little bit closer. And right, so we're going to start there. Hopefully you've got a good angle on this. So I'm just going to start gently. It's best to do it quite slowly if you're doing corners. So I'm just allowing the fabric to feed through under the feed dogs, and I'm just very gently giving it a nudge. I've got a straight bit coming up, and then I'm just allowing it to feed round. I think I'm putting a little bit of pressure here, almost like a pivot, to pivot round, but it's very subtle. It's not a huge force going down on it. So again, it takes practice, but not only was I following the edge of the fabric, which was my guide, I'm allowing the fabric to just gently feed round, and it was doing that basically. My fingers are just gently, subtly moving around. So that's the kind of the technique to pick up. I never got it right first time. It does take some practice. So it might be a good idea to just cut some scraps into circles or semicircles, and just practice just doing it with your left hand. What I found, because I've got a treadle as well, and with a treadle you can use two hands because your feet are doing all the work. What I found is, because I'm so used to using my left hand, my right hand was trying to do what my left hand was doing as well, and force to turn it round, because it's like, oh well, I've got this hand now, I can do extra. But actually it doesn't. It actually sometimes can cause a hindrance, and it makes it harder to do the turn because your right hand's trying to get involved. Try it, just practice just with the left hand, and just more so your fingertips than anything else. With sewing in the rounds as well, just go slow. You know, if you're on a machine with a motor, hopefully you can use the motor at a lower speed. If you're hand cranking or a treadle, just try and go as slow and smoothly as you can. If you try to drag that fabric around too quickly, you're going to start causing puckerings. Puckerings? Yeah, puckerings. Or you're dragging it through, so you start to stretch the fabric, and then it will start to just be bumpy and uneven. So practice with rounds, just practice gently, just using your fingers and just gently helping it to go around. Or, well, you can do that, but take your thread for a walk as well, and just have a practice just with scraps. I use calico just for scraps, so it's a really good medium weight material to just practice and muck about on. But I hope that's been helpful. Left-handed, as I say, left-handed sewing, the machines are essentially left-handed. So even if your left hand is not your dominant hand, it's amazing how quickly your hand starts to get used to it, and you find your right hand's, well, if it's not cranking, you find that your right hand actually isn't doing much at all. It doesn't need to, because everything can be controlled with just one hand.